Cecep, Professor Vina Adriani, MED, PhD. Welcome to our Deputy Director for the Program of Siameo Cecep, Itfuti MSc MA. Welcome to our Deputy Director for Administration of Siameo Cecep, Dr. Alice Rosdiawati, MPD. And welcome to our Siameo Cecep's Head of Division and team. Welcome to our speakers, Professor Dr. Amita Gupta from the City College of New York, USA. And welcome to Madam Yulida Pangastuti, PhD from Universitas Gadjah Mada, Indonesia. And also welcome to the committee and all participants of the International Webinar Teachers Professionalism, Global South and North Dialogue. Please kindly adjust your position and kindly turn on your camera during the session and make sure that your microphone is muted. My name is Tiara Delia. I'm Human Resource Management Staff of Siameo Cecep, and I will be the Master of Ceremony of today's meeting. And we do live streaming via Siameo Cecep's YouTube. We seek your concern containing this message. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, entering to the first agenda, please stay seated to the national anthem of Indonesia, followed by Siameo Color and Siameo Song.
Jangan stronger tomorrow. Let's start to make a difference, teaching everyone to learn. Through science, health, and technology, we will share our expertise. By promoting knowledge and policies, we can build a better world. Let us take a stand for our visions of hope, bringing future plans for the people to grow in a life filled with happiness and green. Here at Symphia, building the future is our legacy. We'll achieve our goals through partnership, creating opportunities. By working hand in hand, we can accomplish all our dreams. For a better quality of life is now within our reach. Let us take a stand for our visions of hope, making future plans for the people to grow in a life filled with happiness and green. Here at Symphia, building the future is our legacy. Let us take a stand for our visions of hope, making future plans for the people to grow in a life filled with happiness and green. Here at Symphia, building the future is our legacy. Building the future is our legacy. At Symphia.
Ladies and gentlemen, moving to the next agenda, may we invite the CMO CCEP Director to deliver her welcoming remarks for welcoming remarks. For Professor Vina Adriani, time is yours.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Om Swastiastu, Namo Buddhaya, Salam Kebajikan, Rahayu, Sampurasun, Namaste. Very good afternoon to all the respected guests. But I would like to extend my warmest welcome to our honorable speakers, Professor Amita Gupta, whose work have inspired me since I was a PhD student. So it is really an honor, Professor Amita, to have you here. I know that you are very busy. Thank you so much for spending your precious time to be with us and sharing your knowledge. And I also would like to extend my warmest appreciation, my warmest welcome to a very dear colleague of mine, who is also another great scholar whose work I admire so much, Dr. Yulida Pangastuti. Thank you so much, Dr. Yulida, for joining us today. So today's event is part of our webinar series. As probably the video has shown you before, that CMO CCEP is a regional center in Southeast Asia whose main focus is on early childhood education, care, and parenting. So part of our responsibility is that to provide space for dialogue between teachers, practitioners, academics, and also policymakers. So I'm hoping that in today's webinar, we'll be able to sharing our perspective. And I think the keynote speakers here, there are I'm sorry, I'm getting nervous here. Sorry, I think it's because I haven't seen you for quite some time, so Amita. Yeah. So today's webinar is our opportunity to discuss further about various topics in early childhood education care and parenting. And today we are going to discuss about teachers' professionalism. I think very often when we are talking about teachers' professionalism, we are limiting our discussion to various standard what it takes to become a professional teachers. But I think there is a need to go beyond standard in order to understand what do we mean by teachers' professionalism. So I'm hoping in today's webinar we'll be able to engage we'll be able to engage in more critical ways to understand and perhaps redefine what we mean by teachers' professionalism. I think there is a need to go beyond existing understanding and also existing definition of teachers' professionalism. I'm not going to give any lecture today because I think that's why we are inviting Professor Amita and also Dr. Yulida. Their knowledge will be able to help us reconceptualize what we mean by teachers' professionalism, and hopefully the dialogue today will also facilitate our understanding about the differences between Global South and Global North when it comes to teachers' professionalism. Professor Amita is a very well-known scholar in the field of post-colonial studies. I think it is her work who inspired me to see early childhood education in more critical lens. And I'm sure through the dialogue that we are having today, the discussion between Professor Amita and also Dr. Yurida will be able to allow us to reimagine the kind of hybrid space between the Global North and Global South understanding of teachers' professionalism. So I'm not going to prolong my remarks today. Again, I just would like to extend my warmest welcome to the keynote speaker, Professor Amita Gupta, and also to Dr. Yulida Pangastuti. And also I would like to welcome all the participants who have attended today's webinar. I hope you all benefiting from the seminars today. And last but not the least, I would like to salute my team for preparing this event. And I'm hoping that this event will allow us to further reconceptualize what we mean by teachers' professionalism. So once again, thank you very much. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Om Shanti, Shanti Om, Namaste.
Thank you very much for Professor Vina Adriani, MED, PhD, for her welcoming remarks. And ladies and gentlemen, before we moving forward into the next agenda, we would like to have group picture for today's meeting. Please kindly turn on your camera and prepare your brightest smile for today's events. Okay, there are, hang on, I will see how many pages we had. Okay, there are 3 pages and we don't know where you are. So hold on to your brightest smile and on my count, my team and I will capture our moments. Okay, on my count, 1, 2, 3. Then second page, 1, 2, 3. And the last page, 1, 2, 3. Okay, thank you very much for your cooperation. And then we move to the next agenda. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, moving to the next agenda, please allow me to introduce our moderator for today's events, Ms. Asila Priyangi. Asila Priyangi is one of Siamo Cecep College as the capacity building officer. She was working as kindergarten teacher in one of private kindergarten in Bandung City for almost 9 years. In 2017 until 2020, she was becoming a double degree student in Universitas Pendidikan Indonesia and Hiroshima University. And recently, she has becoming the project manager in capacity building division of Siameo Cecep, which aims to make ECCE teachers training module with the children's right and holistic integrated frameworks called Our Happy Neighborhood. And Ms. Asila Priyangi, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Ms. Tiara, for your kind introduction. I would like, please allow me to introduce myself once more. My name is Asila Priyangi. As already mentioned, I'm the Capacity Building Officer of Siameo Cecep It's such a big honor for me actually to be the moderator today, since the two keynote speakers here is actually inspire all my thesis during my graduate school. Thank you very much for having me as the moderator today. Without further delay, I would like to introduce the first keynote speaker today. She is Professor Amita Gupta. Madam Amita Gupta is a professor emerita of early education and a former department chair at the City College of New York, CUNY, with cross-cultural experience in teacher education, school administration, and classroom teaching. As an early childhood specialist, Dr. Gupta has worked in the field of ECE for 35 years, teaching in India and NYC pre-K and K classroom, teaching graduate courses in early childhood education at CUNY, and supervising teachers in early childhood classroom in NYC public and private schools. Dr. Gupta's research interests focus on international and comparative education, post-colonial theory, and the impact of globalization on teacher preparation and parenting beliefs. As an international scholar, she has been giving talks on early education and teacher preparation in North America, Asia, and Europe, and has published extensively. Selected publications include early childhood education, post-colonial theory, teaching practices, and policies in India have been published. There are several titles here. Maybe I just read it, the recent publication that she already made. One of them is Preparing Teachers in a Pedagogy of Third Phase, a Post-Colonial Approach to Contextual and Sustainable Early Childhood Teacher Education in 2020. And then Young Children and Their Educational Rights, Critical Perspective on Policy and Practice in India in 2019. Dr. Gupta has been a Fulbright senior researcher and is an international speaker and consultant for culturally responsive professional development in school and other institutions. That's the brief introduction of our first keynote speakers. Please, all the audience, enjoy the fruitful and insightful presentation of Professor Amita Gupta. Professor Amita Gupta, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Can everybody hear me? Oh.
Yes, Professor.
So thank you. First of all, let me just say that the honor is all mine. Professor Adriani, I thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to be a speaker at this webinar, and I'm really looking forward to it, for the conversation. I'm going to share my screen so I can pull up my PowerPoint. Let's see. Okay. So good afternoon, everyone. Sorry, went to the last slide. I don't know how that happened. 1 second. Give me a minute. That's the one I want to start with. All right. So the topic of my talk today is negotiating teacher professionalism, policy and practice within post-colonial and globalized contexts. And before I say anything, I want to start with just clarifying and defining some of the terms that I will be using in my talk. And I want to start right off the bat with the terms Global South and Global North, which are being used a lot. And I just want to reiterate that the terms Global South and Global North, for the purpose of our work and our discussions and our scholarship, do not refer to geographical directions, but as De Sousa Santos explains really well, they distinguish Eurocentric frames of thinking from other ways of knowing and being. And I think we need to hold that in mind. I also want to clarify my positionality as a researcher and as a scholar and as an early childhood educator. I spent half of my life growing up, living in, and teaching in the Global South. In India, and I was very familiar with the early childhood classroom practices in India. And the second half of my life, I spent in the global north, teaching, working, living, and also being formally trained as an early childhood educator. I spent the last 20 years teaching early childhood education and higher education in the global north. For my research, I chose to focus on practices, early childhood practices and policies in the global south, because I wanted to be able to understand that better. So I kind of straddle both global north and global south at different levels. And I just wanted to kind of clarify how I come to my research and my scholarship and my thinking. Much of my work has been referenced within the context of India, but it could relate to many other formally colonized nations in the global south and also in the global north. Colonization is colonization. The next term that I want to clarify is professionalism and professionalization. Teacher professionalization and professionalism imply the meeting of certain standards in education related to proficiency, and efforts to establish higher standards are continually aspired for. According to Hargreaves, professionalism can refer to the improvement of the quality and standards of teaching practice, whereas professionalization refers to the improvement of the status and standing of the larger teaching profession itself. So I just wanted to kind of clarify that. Often teacher professionalization implies the defining of standards in terms of a more scientific and technical knowledge base. But this definition can tend to disregard and even negate the importance of affective dimensions of teachers' practice, such as their passion for teaching, their patience and commitment, the ability to care for their students, or even their lives outside of the classrooms. So I'm going to come to the affective qualities of teaching in a little later in my talk, so let's hold on to that thought for now. The next term I want to clarify and want to kind of define and explain how I use it, and this is the concept of post-colonialism. Post-colonialism is rooted in the works of two scholars mainly. One was Edward Said in 1978. This is where it really originated. And Edward Said critiqued the way in which the West looked down upon and stereotyped those from the East. It's also rooted in the work, very important work of Gayatri Spivak, 1988, who asked the question of whether the subaltern could speak when silenced by those from the dominant West. For the purpose of my work, I will define post-colonial theory inspired by the definitions offered by the following scholars. And these are the definitions that speak to me most, that post-colonial theory, post-colonialism, is a continuing contest between the dominance of the colonizers and the subsequent legacies that were created. It's a transactional two-way dialogue between philosophies of the colonized and the colonizer. And it's an intercultural negotiation between the ideas of the colonizer and the colonized. Now, as a result of these two-way interactions, we can assume that colonialism is not a thing of the past, but continues to linger in the present. Because in all of these definitions, what is common is that intercultural interaction, that transaction. And because the transaction continues even today, even in modern times, there's always transaction between two different cultures that come together. Globalization also can be put into this category, because globalization is also a concept where two different cultures come together and there's an interflow of transaction of cultural elements. So it continues to linger in the present, and even now, decades after independence from British rule, colonial values are still shaping political, social, and educational structures in India and other formerly colonized nations. Now, what is common to both post-colonialism and globalization because of this transactional nature that they both are characterized by, but there is also the emergence of a space called hybridity, another concept called hybridity. Post-colonial and globalization processes between two different cultures are in essence two-way flow of elements that pass through the fluid boundaries of each culture. And in this transcultural mixing, a hybrid space is created, which is characterized by layers of power dynamics. Now, Homi Bhabha referred to this as the third space of cultural hybridity. Much of Indian society reflects such a hybridity, which is shaped not only by current globalization effects and not only historical colonial encounters, but also by the transnational flows between India because of its immense and vastly diverse hierarchies. This hybridity also extends into classrooms in India. So the same hybridity that we see in Indian society is reflected in the classrooms. In one of my earlier studies, some urban early childhood classrooms in India revealed a space of pedagogical hybridity where curriculum and pedagogy were simultaneously influenced by local, colonial, and progressive ideologies and practices. We can use post-colonial theory to explore these layered ideologies and the arguments between diverse perspectives regarding what may be considered as appropriate practices or inappropriate practices. And I will come to the appropriateness of early childhood practices a little later in my talk. Before I go there, I want to just take a couple of slides and give you a very, very brief overview of the educational context of India, because I will be talking about my research based in India. India has had a very long and complex history of education, which has been influenced by diverse socio-cultural political forces that dominated the country since ancient times. In more recent centuries, India experienced European occupation for several hundred years. Britain itself established its trading post in India in the 17th century and started to govern first parts of India and then the entire country in the 18th century until India gained independence in 1947. Now, there are two noteworthy British colonial policies were introduced, and they created fundamental changes into the Indian school system, and this was during the time of colonization. These policies on curriculum and pedagogy allowed colonial rulers to control all aspects of education in India. The first policy was requiring English to be the language of instruction in all schools, supported by British administrators. And the second policy was establishing an examination-based, textbook-centered, teacher-directed academic system. Both these colonial policies still linger, and even today you see effects of these policies in the school systems in India. And as is clear, both these policies ensured that the content and the knowledge that children were learning and students were learning was selected by the British administrators, and they decided what students were going to learn and what they needed to know in order to succeed. Now, 75 years after independence, the formal structures of learning and knowledge systems inherited from British colonialism continue to dominate educational institutions across India. And this is despite recommendations made in 2005 by the Indian National Curriculum Framework to move towards learner-centered teaching. But the structures are so entrenched and so deeply rooted that it's taking a very, very, very long time to move towards a practice that is more learner-centered. Today, in post-independent India, education is a concurrent subject, which means both central government and state governments are jointly responsible for its implementation and administration. Historically, early education in India was not under the jurisdiction of the Ministry of Education, and it's only very recently, in recent years, that ECE has been recognized as a very specific grade level in the schooling of children. Now, Early education has been, again, continuing with the context, a little bit of the context. Early education has been primarily available in India at two levels. One was mostly the private nursery schools, which catered largely to higher income families. And then we had the government-sponsored national scheme called the Integrated Child Development Services. And this provided childcare to at-risk populations in indigenous, rural, and low-income communities. Early childhood settings now also include pre-K and kindergarten classrooms in private or government schools, NGO-sponsored centers, urban daycares, and mobile creches. The other thing to remember, again, going with the context of Indian education, is that India is a hugely diverse country, culturally, religiously, linguistically, socioeconomically. So schooling is experienced in very, very different ways by the approximately 260 million school-going children. Schooling experiences depend on a number of things, like whether schools are government or nonprofit or private, the geography of the school, where it is located, the infrastructure available, the pedagogy that is being implemented, the curriculum that has been determined, and also the socioeconomic backgrounds of children. And there's so much diversity that there is no one kind of schooling experience that children have in India. Everybody has a different kind of experience. I now want to come to pedagogical hybridity. We spoke about this a little bit earlier when I was defining post-colonialism. And I want to share my earlier studies on early childhood teachers in Indian schools, which revealed examples of such a pedagogical hybridity. Now, until about 15 years ago, teachers in India had been trained and prepared in theories of development, learning, and educational philosophy that mostly reflected Euro-American thinking. In recent years, more Indian concepts have been incorporated into the teacher training curriculum. In a study that I conducted several years ago with teachers in a private school in India, the early childhood teachers shared that they did not feel prepared to teach based on their College of Education colonial curriculum. The formal theory learned during teacher preparation was often disconnected from actual practice, especially in culturally diverse classrooms. Teachers' classroom practice was largely informed by their own social, cultural, historical experiences. These influences on teaching practice also varied greatly with the teacher's own diverse cultural backgrounds. And social, cultural, philosophical, and historical factors characterizing the Indian worldview were not acknowledged in the teacher education curriculum. Now, we know that the Indian context, the context of Indian society is very strongly post-colonial in nature because of centuries of European occupation and British rule. Due to this prolonged colonization, the Western colonial ethos lingers in post-colonial India even today in significant ways. The transactional nature of post-colonialism characterizes all interactions in Indian society. For instance, there is a back and forth of English and local languages between Western and Indian ideas, Western and Indian behaviors, values, and mentality, and between the more tangible elements of cultures like Western food and Indian food, clothing, music, architecture, etc. Now, this transaction and this kind of conversation, dialogue between the West and the East is promoted even more so by the effects of globalization. Now, a similar pedagogical hybridity is seen to exist in schools and classrooms, where curriculum and pedagogy are simultaneously influenced by local, colonial, and progressive ideologies and practices. There is a juxtaposition of what is familiar and unfamiliar to the Indian context, what is Western and local, creative, academic, teacher-directed or learner-centered, structured or unstructured. And this kind of juxtaposition of different ideas was observed in classrooms widely across not only India, but even in many Asian countries that I had visited. Specifically for India, in the Indian classrooms that I observed and studied, Three clearly diverse influences on early childhood teacher preparation and practice were identified. One was the academically rigorous, exam-based British colonial design of the education system, a legacy which continues to linger long after India gained independence in 1947. The second thread that I identified was the DAP influence, that is, the developmentally appropriate practice influenced Euro-American discourse of early childhood education. And then the third one was the underlying Indian cultural and spiritual beliefs that shaped the image of the child and the image of the teacher as viewed in Indian society. Now I want to talk a little bit about recent educational policy in India, and specifically with regard to early childhood education policy. Now, the National Education Policy of India, it's a government document, a Government of India document, policy document that frames the regulation of elementary through higher education across rural and urban India. The first national policy on education after British rule ended was released in 1968. The second policy followed in 1986 with a modification added in 1992. And the most recent, newest national education policy was just released 2 years ago in 2020. So far after independence, since independence, India has had 3 national policies of education. Now, the NEP 2020, which is the National Education Policy 2020, it proposes in terms of early childhood education that ECE be play-based, inquiry-based, and comprising of alphabets, languages, numbers, counting, colors, shapes, indoor and outdoor play, puzzles and logical thinking, problem solving, drawing, painting, and other visual arts, crafts, drama and puppetry, music and movement. Related to the latest policy is a document called the Preschool Curriculum, which was published in, I think, 2019-2020. And that is the guidebook that currently shapes early childhood education practice in India today. The document's guiding principles are informed by neuroscience and promote the concept of DAP, developmentally appropriate practice, to shape early childhood practice in India. So the highlights of the preschool curriculum that shape early childhood practice in India are the following: that curriculum should be based on DAP, developmentally appropriate practice. There should be an elimination of decontextualized rote and teacher-directed learning. Quality early childhood education should be defined in terms of children's active interactions with their peers, with their teachers, and with materials. There should be a valuing of children's cultural backgrounds, prior knowledge, and experiences. Play should be viewed as central to children's well-being. There should be a use of home language or languages as in the instructional language, and there should be high family and community involvement. Now, some recommendations of the policy are somewhat potentially problematic, and that is what I'm going to come to now. And 2 examples where I feel that there are problems or challenges that need to be addressed are, one, the very strong urging of using DAP, the developmentally appropriate practices known that we know in America. And the second one is their recommendation to use holistic and authentic assessment of children. And I'm going to talk about both of them, one after the other, and kind of explain why I feel that there is a problem or there's a challenge with that recommendation, and that challenge needs to be addressed before these policies can be implemented. Now, taking DAP first, DAP is really a published set of guidelines. It's a published book that offers guidelines for early childhood education that was published in America in 1987, first published in 1987. Now, in its earliest iteration, DAP principles were informed primarily by 2 Western Euro-American theorists, Piaget and Erikson. And their research was conducted mostly within global North's Eurocentric communities, where children's development was viewed to occur in a normative linear progression. DAP's appropriateness thus refers to and prioritizes skills and behaviors that young children growing up in Euro-American communities are expected to learn. Although DAP has been revised since 1987, the terminology is still suggestive of a specific form of teaching practice that will be considered appropriate. Now, this language is problematic, it is exclusionary, and it serves to marginalize diverse forms of teaching that may not fall within DAP parameters. Any cultural pedagogy or teaching practice that does not match the parameters of DAP would then be viewed as inappropriate. In other words, pedagogies defined by values, skills, and attitudes for children growing up in socio-cultural, economic, political contexts other than Eurocentric risk being judged as being inappropriate. And that, to me, is problematic. An example of a disparity between the global North and South perceptions on appropriate would be the adult-child pedagogical interaction. So let's consider the adult-child interaction. Now, the defining marker of progressive education's child-centered pedagogy places the locus of control within the child. Although efforts to move toward a learner-centered classroom do signal a significant improvement over the rigidly colonial academic classroom of the past, it's definitely a good recommendation, definitely a good move. But the fact is that in the activity-based experiences that were observed in many classrooms, the locus of control still lay within the teacher. The adult had the control. And so to say that we are doing a child-centered activity where the teacher is still in control is really not a child-centered activity. So that kind of has to be explained and thrashed out a little bit. A prolonged adult-child relationship commonly occurs in countries with collectivist cultures where it is very acceptable for the adult to be in control. But the same idea would conflict with the concept of child-centeredness as understood in countries with individualistic cultures. And so if you have, I would not see a problem if the adult was somewhat in control in a collectivist culture in the classroom. But if we were to judge that classroom and evaluate that classroom from the lens of a child-centered framework that had been developed in the global North, immediately there would be a problem with that classroom. In the Indian worldview, the adult plays a prominent role in the adult-child transaction, encouraged by the involvement of a very extensive adult network in child rearing. The adult presence is a very prominent presence in the life of any child growing up in a collectivist culture. Now, this may be less apparent in individualistic Euro-American communities. Now, the second challenge that I see emerging in the recommendation that NEP, the National Education Policy 2020, has is in its goal to value holistic development and the authentic assessment of children. Again, it's a good recommendation, but this could prove to be problematic in the context of the Global South. India's preschool curriculum recommends that each child should be assessed individually through informal and systematic observations of children's play and other activities. Teachers are required to observe, scaffold, document each individual child in addition to assessing children's health, nutritional, physical, and social well-being. So this is the recommendation that the policy is putting forth. Now, assessment portfolios for each individual child are key in any learner-centered classroom. Assessment portfolios for each individual child are key for an effective formative assessment to happen. And for these assessment portfolios, for a good comprehensive assessment portfolio, preferred assessment techniques that are required to maintain such portfolios include documenting the children's voices, their experiences, by using videos and cameras, writing detailed and exhaustive anecdotal reports, running records, and keeping observational notes of individual children engaged in a diverse range of activities. That is what authentic assessment really means. Now, these techniques are constrained by the ground realities often found in the global south, such as, first of all, class sizes, which would go up to 50 and 60, right? Scarcity of classroom supplies. Sometimes the teachers are inadequately trained in this assessment system. There's an absence of running water, electricity, and sanitation facilities in schools. And then states with political contexts that are unsupportive of democratic child-centered values. So implementation of borrowed policies is not always feasible, and that is why I wanted to kind of highlight the problematic nature. And unless these policies, unless these recommendations are spelled out more clearly for the Indian context, their implementation is not going to be easy. Now, borrowing from global policies is a highly complex process and can be successful only if undertaken with a careful understanding of its core principles and how they might fit into an existing cultural context, paying close attention to adapting the policy for the local context, outlining a clear theoretical framework, ensuring adequate infrastructure, and efficiently preparing relevant practitioners and stakeholders. So that is key. Efficiently preparing relevant practitioners and stakeholders. Everybody who is going to be responsible for those policies to be implemented need to be first prepared adequately. In India, following the new policy, teachers are going to be left to grapple with many ambiguities as they on their own try to balance an early childhood global discourse with locally represented curricula and pedagogies that will reflect the cultural hybridity of Indian society. Powerful forces of globalization in the form of neoliberalism and Western capitalism have been actively shaping and informing the developing world, resulting in the establishment of economic, political, and commercial colonies. Now, as global and local discourses engage with and transform each other, the discoursees find themselves in a hybrid third space. In the global south, the discoursees, as they're discussing global south and global north ideas, they find themselves in this hybrid third space. This third space can be the medium which fosters the emergence of pedagogical hybridity, which reflects ideas about teachers that are both teaching, that are both local and global, modern and traditional. Not only is it important for teachers to know about current educational research and global discourse, but also for them to be equipped with a local educational discourse that will validate the underlying strengths of their own culture. A minute ago, we spoke about the impact of neoliberalism, and one of the impacts has been on determining and identifying what standards teachers should be held to. And those standards have become increasingly more scientific and more technical. Findings from some of my earlier research on urban early childhood teachers revealed that perspectives of teachers who understood teaching there were teachers who understood teaching not as a scientific or technical process, but as a responsible and sacred profession. And they projected the image, the early childhood teacher in the image of a loving mother who practiced tough love and taught children character and citizenship values. This is a quotation from one of the teachers I had interviewed. And so she said loving mother, but I would say a loving parent or a loving caregiver would be equally relevant. So when you see what teachers are thinking of what good teachers should be like and what good teaching is, there is a bit of a conflict there, right? And in the end, we consider the overall view on teaching. So we consider the overall view on teaching it being either a vocation or a profession. So that is the question that comes up. Is teaching a vocation or is teaching a profession? And the preparation of teachers within each of these frames necessarily invites a slightly different approach. Now, based on interviews with and survey responses from teachers and school administrators, I found that the perceived roles and responsibilities of early childhood teachers to be, and this was again my research in the Global South, they felt that the roles and responsibilities of a teacher is to balance academic and spiritual development of the students, They teach cultural values as a parallel curriculum to the prescribed academic curriculum. Teaching cultural values as a parallel curriculum to the prescribed curriculum. Providing live direction and guidance to students, setting clear boundaries for student behaviors, winning the love and respect of the students, treating students in the same way the teacher would treat their own children, whether in affection or reprimand, and be a parental figure to them. Possessing a high degree of expertise and in-depth knowledge in an academic content area, being a role model to reinforce values, behaviors, and attitudes to children by first modeling these themselves. So that was important. Now, these qualities and dispositions seem to collide with the more technical skills called for by current requirements for the professionalization of teachers within a neoliberal climate. This is seen in many countries of the global north and increasingly in the global south. The potential professionalization of the teacher entails teachers being taken through an intricate system of degrees in teaching, certifications, and licensing. The question that arises here is whether this process of intense professionalization might result in the whole teacher, the whole, being split into a personal self and then a professional self and forced to exist separately. The personal self existing out of school and the professional self existing within the walls of the classroom. In other words, might the over-professionalized early childhood teacher result in a more dehumanized professional? To reiterate Hargreaves' claim made at the beginning of this talk, stronger professionalization does not always mean greater professionalism. We need teacher education programs which will prepare teachers to become critical thinkers and learn new ways of thinking about teaching, form communities for shared understanding and dialogue, learn to explore relationships between diversity, oppression, colonization, and pedagogy, and learn to practice within the space of cultural and pedagogical hybridity. In summary, we need policymakers that will support the preparation of teachers in a pedagogy that is values-based, respectful of diversity, draws on local resources, is globally competitive, and holds high academic standards. This way, teachers will not only feel validated and confident about their classroom practice, but also be empowered to facilitate children's learning and holistic development and prepare them to better succeed in a more globalized 21st century. That is kind of the end of my talk, and I just wanted to share some of these articles. If you want to read up more about what I just said, I have written about this in the following articles, and I can share them with the organizers of the webinar, and they can share that with you later. And to get into even more detail about my past research, I'd like to kind of just share my books with you, because all of my work is reflected in all of these books. So, you know, but that's the end of my talk, and thank you very much. And I am going to stop the screen share here and hand it over to the moderator.
Thank you very much, Professor Ambita Gupta, for your inspiring presentation. I do believe that all the audience here in the same situation with me. I felt a goosebump since your presentation really unpacked something that is oftenly hidden within the ECCE setting. Thank you very much. For the question and answer discussion will be held after the second presentation of our keynote speakers here, Madam Yulida Pangastuti. Dr. Yulida is actually holds as a PhD from the University of Auckland in 2021, and she is also Magister of Social Science from the National University of Singapore in 2006, and a Bachelor of Social Science from the University of Indonesia in 2003. His doctoral thesis entitled Finding Voices, Telling Stories, Expansion of Early Childhood Education in Indonesia won the Redding Jones Outstanding Dissertation Award 2020 from Reconceptualizing Early Childhood Education, an international academic association that facilitates critical thinking in the field of early childhood education. Apart from being an academic, Madam Yulida also holds the position of Director of Tulodo Indonesia, a non-profit institution engaged in research. Together with several academics at several universities in Indonesia, Madam Yulida has also developed research discussion forums related to children, early childhood, and women, both at the local and regional level. That's my brief introduction of our keynote speakers, Madam Yulida. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Ashila. Thank you for the introductions. I
You're
think,
welcome.
yes, I'd like to thank you, Siamio Cecep, for the invitations, to my dearest colleague, my dearest friend, Professor Fina Adriani, for the invitations, and also for Amita, of course, who's a big name, not only for Fina, but also for me. I still remember finding her book, and I was just like, oh, this is possible. So thank you so much, Amita, for paving the the way for analysis. So today I may not have how do you call it, like specific presentations on teacher professionalism, but because my research is much more broader, but I try to pick, some relevant stories and narrative that can help, shed the or create a more nuanced understanding about what is teacher in early childhood education in Indonesia, and what does it mean? What does it mean to become a teacher, and what is professionalisms, and how professionalisms interact with those notions. Okay, so my title of my presentations is The Birth of Teachers. I just picked, this is based on my conversations with one of my participants in my research long time ago in 2014 and to 2018. As a background, I'd like to frame, the growth of early childhood education in Indonesia is inseparable from the global dynamic. And I'd like to show you, how the transformations happens. Like Susan Robertson's here, for example, she argues that education has changed because of the presence of this global movement, or global movement and global, I don't know, maybe we can call it regime, that try to govern education. So education has changed a lot from national development to norm setting, and now in the age of neoliberalisms, we see education more and more as a learning, as individual development, and as a tool for competitive comparisons. And it has been framed in many ways as crisis of teaching professions, which Robertson says that it's a tool, it's a way, it's a mechanism to allow colonizations of symbolic control of teaching policy. So it means that the current trend of teaching policy is never neutral. Of course, we all know that. And to plot that in a more specific country context, I owe this chart to my colleagues, Ali Forman, who's also here with us. Ali made this research about how teachers how quality has developed along across the years in Indonesia. And here we see how early childhood education evolved from colonial period to currently what Ali called as a post reform period. So during the colonial, the ECE was used as as a medium for cultural purifier to teach, especially the white European descendants and mixed children with proper Dutch language. And it grows, and when Indonesia gained its independence in the 1940s, we got the old order here, and then our leaders at that time wanted to prove that as an independent nations, our children would be the projections of what civilized Indonesians would be. And we still use the system of kindergarten, which actually a legacy from the colonial government. And then after that, we moved to the new order. There were sort of disruptions in between old order and new order, but the disruption was because of the communist dominations. But it's very briefly, so it never, and the communists never got into the top of the government position. So, but their presence was quite strong, but short-lived. How they mobilized women to involve them for their rights, to educate them, the women's rights and children's rights and political movement. And then we have this new order, which is heavily focused on development, not only development of like in the ECE understanding like what we understand it today, but also development of infrastructure and developments of education, our health system. And we have these Pancasila values, which become the basis of our nations. But the way the new order government, because of the attempt of coup by the communists, the disruption that I mentioned before, the new order used Pancasila mostly as a symbol of loyalty. So even the small children in the 1980s, I was one of them. We had to learn to memorize what Pancasila values were, and we had to recite one by one the 5 principles. But also we learn about our teachers. Like we had to see our teachers as the agent of correction. Like if you want to know which one is right and which one is wrong, we were told that we had to ask our teacher, because they were the holders of the ultimate truth. And ECE became a correction site. This is what Ali Foreman argues. And the curriculum was very centralistic, very prescriptive, and had to be obeyed at all costs. And then come the democratic reform with the Suharto resignations. We had this democratic reform, where there's like euphoria of of freedom. Like when the old tyrant's gone, then people felt like we could do more thing in much more democratic way. And somehow it coincides with these intensive neoliberal projects driven by donors that place children, that narrate children as human capital in the golden age period. And then we suddenly had this decentralized curriculum where teachers were positioned more as facilitator instead of as the source of truth. And it's also the entrance of developmentalisms in ECE. And then in the post-reform, we had the thickening, what Robertson called as the thick governance of educations. Like we more and more we had standardization mechanisms. We had indicators, which is quite rigid sometimes, and children growth and developments measured and standardized, and teachers were also assessed for their professional status, for their academic qualifications, and they also have more mechanisms about to decide who is professional and who's not. So this is just also a background to say is that how Indonesia, this is particularly for early childhood education, how early childhood education in Indonesia has grown rapidly. This is the global trends on early childhood educations. Due to the increase of official development assistance, or what we commonly recognize as donors, giving countries, developing countries, with money for early childhood education, and it grows tremendously. The orange one show that it's very high, and the enrollment also jumped, and the developing, and it's especially in 2009, 2003, 2010. And it's very interesting that the top 10% of global increase in terms of the enrollment of ECE was one of is Indonesia, and then the second one is Brazil. The third one is Russian Federations. The fifth, the sixth, and then I mean, like we saw many non-European, non-North American countries growing in terms of enrollment of ECE. It becomes a more visible trend across the southern countries or the global south. And this is in Indonesia. So, I mean, as I mentioned before, that the growth of ECE in Indonesia has been so much determined by the involvement of international donors and also the global movement. Like, I remember quite clearly back in the 1990s when the EFA target, EFA had just declared, and then the government suddenly had to think how to increase, how to double the early childhood development program. So the target was 75 coverage of ECE, which is quite ambitious. But somehow, maybe it's not really 75%, but it has been able to increase the enrollment quite, it's like a big jump from back in 2000 to like 2018. So this is just the background how ECE became a massive phenomena in Indonesia starting in 2000. And that, if you look at the chart, that started when the global interest arose. Here we're talking about, but when we're talking about professional teachers, it's as the number of ECE center increase, of course, Indonesia needs more and more teachers. And in the beginning, there was nothing. There was just the main issue, the main objective is to have people to be in the position of teacher, right? Because of the rising number and the support provided by the government, also by the external parties. We have the professionalism here. the government did not really think about professionalism before, but then after because ECE was one of the youngest education sector in the country, but the professionalism in ECE was also brought by the growing trend in higher level of education. So when Indonesia had this law on teacher and a lecturer in 2005, there's this demand for teacher as professional educator. So that discourse emerged. And then whether we like it or not, ECE became part of that current. Based on the law, the teacher must possess either a 4-year diploma or an undergraduate degree as their minimal academic requirement. And in Indonesia, it means that they have to have minimum 144 credits and earn teacher certifications. And the teacher certification here is proven by the ownership of teaching professional certificate, which a teacher could get that after they go through a certificasi program through structural training and lengthy procedure. But apart from that, or along with that, there's this growing trend of audit culture, measuring teacher, controlling teacher for the sake of quality and standards. That's just to give you a snippet about what teacher professional is. So now we go to my research. I'll take you to my research. So this research was done in between 2014, 2017 in Atambua of Belu district of Timor Island. And if you are not familiar with Indonesian context, Atambua or Timor Island belong to the eastern region of the country, which often suffered from inequality and problem with development and also stigma, social and cultural stigma because of their, what the people see as the low development status. I use ethnographic observations. I interviewed some teachers, but in this for today session, I just like to highlight my conversation with Rita. She's a female teacher. At that time, she was 42 years old, and she became ECE teacher during the ECE expansion program, which happened in her hometown around 2013. So yeah, the idea was to capture the period of expansion. And I use docile bodies because I think, if you know, docile bodies is known as a concept, as a Michel Foucault's concept. And this is very interesting because I found that Michel Foucault was like, I was trying to play with Michel Foucault's idea of making a soldier. So if you read Michel Foucault's book of Discipline and Punishment, basically he said that we can make soldier out of any bodies. Like he mentioned here as the body of peasant or of farmers. He said the soldier has become something that can be made out of formless clay, an inert body, the machine required to be constructed, etc., etc. Basically, Foucault said that if we make sure that someone got their body disciplined, everyone can become a soldier. And you know that soldiers have a very different, very distinct physical appearance, right? Very, very serious and very straight. Not like you don't see a soldier as someone who you would joke with, for example. And here, Michel Foucault inspired me with this research, but I also like to draw from Bartke, who critique Foucault for using a man mindset of men. Sparky said, Foucault treats body throughout as it were one, as if the bodily experience of men and women did not differ, and as if men and women bore the same relationship to the characteristic institutions. And women, like men, are subject to many of the same disciplinary practices. But Foucault is blind, she said, to those disciplines that produce a modality of embodiment that is peculiarly feminine. I just find it very interesting because the process which I taught and had a conversation with Rita took me, like a tour to, his theory. So if Indonesia has a massive increase of teacher in relatively short times of period, the question would be how the teachers are made. I mean, we know that teachers are separate. Teachers are not farmers. Teachers are not mothers. Maybe they slightly look like, someone or mothers probably, but they're not mothers. How teachers were made. And in the beginning of implementation, as I mentioned to you before, the term of teacher recruitment was very seldom used. Instead, the discourse was more about how to mobilize, utilize, and train the available human resource. At that time, the discourse was looking at the female community voluntary cadres who were already at the front line of service provisions. If you're Indonesian, you know who they are. They're the cadre for the Posyandu, the cadre for the BKB, they're everywhere in the community doing weighing the babies, teaching parenting. They were active on those programs. The use of volunteers were also promoted by international agencies, believing in the value of convergence, that female volunteers who had been helping with babies and women in their community would be the most feasible resources to help with the new ECE program. The use of female volunteers also means economic efficiency, because if you're volunteers, you're not supposed to expect salary, right? So it also, by removing the questions of costs or salary expenditure, it could speed up the process of expansion, especially for a country like Indonesia, a country that had, at that time, that had just suffered from the Asian 1997 crisis, a country that just turned from 32 years of tyranny to, democracy. The reliance of female volunteers perpetuated, intensified, and exploited women's maternalistic values, unfortunately. So I'd like to take you from one stage to another. So Foucault mentions that we can make anyone basically from the formless clay. So when I had this conversation with Rita, I realized how she was selected because of her gender, how she was selected because she was available. States the best candidate would be someone who could be recognized from afar, someone whose presence was already known by the community. So, and someone whose characteristic would fit the job that needs a specific requirement. So the introduction of ECE through globalized movement placed learning as something that should not be done. This is quite different, because we realize that learning is individual, learning is that everyone can thrive. So learning becomes very rigidly regulated, and thus it can't be done sembarangan or carelessly. So you need to pick someone who, could minimize the risk. And women socioculturally thought to be fit for the job. Teachers were required to show their feminine quality of asi, asah, and asu, loving, sharpening, and nurturing, which reflect what Hani Yulindrasari finding on the widespread perceptions of women caregiving instinct and men over men as the parent who don't understand the children. And women in Indonesian communities also been known as labor, who can subsidize the generally low wage condition of their community. So women in our community was always there whenever there was no money. They would always volunteering, they would always do for the sake of their community welfare, and they maintain the ideology of self-help and support cost-flexible work. And this is the case with the Rita's manager, who found it would be very difficult for him to recruit someone who come from university background. They didn't have money. How would they pay them, those university graduates? So instead of choosing the academically qualified teacher, many EC managers in difficult area chose to have female volunteers because it's better than nothing, but it's safe. So that's selecting gender and selecting who were available becomes the important. And then the second step is what Foucault said as get rid of that peasants. So we need to make the candidate of teacher become more and more like teacher. So what the government did and what many international donors did was to provide informal training for our capacity development that did not refer to the formal qualification of teachers to improve certain performance. So training in this case is an important technological process to guide and transform individuals to shift their shelf from materials of community volunteers to regulate their subjectivity and positionality as teacher. So training is needed because they need to shift these women from volunteers to teacher. And after completing sessions, the participants were projected to be an agent of ideological and practical aspect embedded in the training. So they have to be the voice, they have to be the face of the ideology that used in the training, embarking a journey of socialization and relationship, which emerged from the training. The creation of teacher through training formally from the bodies of volunteers was also a strategy to avoid legal consequences, because based on the current law, the current national education law, non-formal ECE are still largely not recognized. So they were not teacher. And the training was not, the problem is the training was not also organized continuously. Most of them only lasted 3 to 5 days, once or twice a year, with diverse and disconnected themes. And it creates stress and a deep feeling of inadequacy among teachers. And this is on the right side is the certificate that Rita got from one of her training. I found the certificate is very cheeky, very naughty, because why? If you look carefully, if you're Indonesian, you would know the titles that the government put on the jabatan or position was ECE educator. But was he really an educator that recognized by the law? No. But based on this certificate, Rita went back home and thought that she was ready to be teacher. And the second part of Foucault's theory was to make it pliable, ready at all time, which means that everyone who were becoming a teacher at that time had to learn about their new identity, had to learn about how to regulate themselves. So I had this interesting conversation with Rita. I asked her, what makes you very happy from being a teacher? And she looked at me and said, apart from being useful. So she's, so being a teacher should be known as something that's useful. And then she said, no, people call me Ibu Guru, a teacher mother. And what's very interesting for me was Rita used to be a vendor in a market. She was selling homemade caramel candies that gave her earning 4 times higher than her current wage as an early childhood teacher, which is only $20 per month when we had this interview. Rita admitted that the center gave her the title. The children greet her with Ibu Guru and a shouting style, and it gave her so much warmth and joy. And she said, I am an Ibu, and my children are everywhere. And what did they call you before? I asked her. Just Tanta or Auntie. Her face was, very happy. She said that having the title of Ibu meant more than just a Tanta. So she believed that when a woman reached maturity, then she deserved to be called as an Ibu, not Tanta. Tanta doesn't have maternal responsibility, doesn't have direct responsibility of how to take care of children. So this is where I said that Sandra Bartke would also help to strengthen Foucault. Bartke said disciplining the bodies of women is not pursued by individual aesthetic purpose of the woman alone. Rather, it is part of the ideal from which the femininity is articulated. Women's space is not a field which her bodily intentionality can be freely realized, but an enclosure which she feels herself positioned and by which she is confined. So as female volunteers, the opportunity to be teacher meant that they would be trained and they would have access to be an active and sensitive and progressive and socially conscious mother, and who would serve their surroundings in a better way. When Rita was addressed as Ibu, she was granted the position of an authoritative female figure for little children from her community. Ibu was more respectful than Auntie. When a child hailed her as Ibu, she felt an immediate connection as pedagogue as well as a maternal figure. And the last one, the air of a soldier. But what soldier? So I'd like to highlight here that, all right, we can make teacher, but would you really take female teachers like Rita as teacher? Rita is one out of several 100,000 newly recruited non-formal ECE teacher. The genealogy of her profession points at the pressures coming from the development ambition to have as many centers and thus as many teachers as possible. But her presence is pushed from the pictures of our legal policy under the Indonesian education system. Teacher requirements for ECE are known to be insensitive to non-formal, to community-based ECE teacher. As I mentioned earlier, in Indonesia, especially you talk with the Ministry of Education, there was a big notion that good teachers are certified teacher. Making non-formal teacher ineligible for certification makes it difficult for them to be recognized professionally. Professional recognition is also important because it means a remuneration. They can be integrated into a remuneration system, like a standard of remuneration system. The latest education statistic revealed that there are more than 400,000 of non-formal ECE teachers in Indonesia whose status is not clear. So, I mean, from those stories, I just want to ask questions. What is professional? I mean, I'd like to highlight this is as a note from the margins, that the gaps between the governments, particularly the central government perceptions about what professional teacher means, and the community who live and interact with their teachers so pronounced. And becoming a teacher in Indonesia is easy, is far from being, technocratic process, professional and vocationally driven. It involves sociological, historical, political, affect, sentimental process. Where all these things in our current teacher professional standards? The process of mobilizations has been backing up the government. I mean, the women who become teachers, ECE teacher, have backup government desires in the global context. And back again, this COVID-19 pandemic remind us how the ECE teachers work and struggle, and regardless all the limitation and constraints, that somehow our ECE still survive until today. Although they were not paid, many teachers lost their job, many ECE centers had to be closed. And yet once there's an opportunity to open, they spark, they like bloom, and they open again everywhere. Their dedication to teach, to organize themselves, regardless the difficulties and limitations, but just so amazing for me. I learned so much. And teacher professionalism scheme in Indonesia is often viewed more as tools to discipline, to govern, to categorize, to select, instead of as an opportunity for access to education resource. I think the most important thing is that the spirit should be empowerment, carefully looking at the gender, socio-economic impacts, not replacement. Like if you, Indonesia, I think, has a case with the midwife, for example, when the government kind of stress on the midwife, that the midwife needs to, midwife is slightly different, but we can learn so much with from midwife's case. The government of Indonesia has placed so many new midwives in many communities. This is it is a big improvement. But if you look carefully in the community in interaction, most of the midwives, those externally, newly placed or externally assigned midwife without the approval of the community, they face a lot of problems. Like they were not trusted. They had to compete with the traditional healers and stuff. But we have to learn from their case that teachers should not looking at outside just because of the teacher professionalism. We have to import all teacher from the big cities, because where the big cities are where all university graduates from. We should not do that. We should be more in empowering spirit. And in the end of the day, to whom teachers should prove themselves. This is my last slide. I just want you, for me, it's very powerful conversation I had with Rita. So one day I asked her, do you ever feel that you're not a teacher? I asked Rita the question, the most difficult question for me to ask, actually, not only because I thought it could offend her, but it was a disturbing question for me as well. She asked me back what I meant by the question. So I had to spell it out, put it into the context of law, produced in a place that felt like light a year away from a Tambua's reality. And she replied me with this, do you think I am not? She cleverly replied my question with a question, asking for my subjective opinion. Quickly, I shrugged and said, of course you are. She returned my answer with a smile and said, that's what counts. Thank you very much. That's my presentations. Hope you can learn something or we can discuss something. Thank you. Back to the moderator.
Thank you very much, Dr. Yulda. Of course, we have many things to learn, new things that we have learned a lot from your presentation. Thank you very much. Since the end of the presentation of the two keynote speakers, now we are entering the Q&A session. If you would like to deliver your question directly to both of the speakers, you may turn on your microphone and then directly ask to the keynote speakers here. Okay, I can see one participant here raising her hand. Miss Uli Ratna. Would you like to deliver your question directly? Please, you can turn on your microphone. Oh,
Oke, sudah Mbak.
okay.
Oke, thank you. Is my voice clear?
Yes, Miss. Please continue.
Okay, thank you. And then I would like to say thank you to Dr. Yulida Pangastuti and Dr. Amita Gupta. My name is Uli. I'm from Jakarta. Thank you so much for your presentation. It's really make me have more insight about the early childhood education. What I would like to know is first, probably this is the question for Dr. Amita Gupta. Based on the recommendation that you have on your research, is there any best practice in India that has focused on the teacher professionalism? Because in Indonesia, hello, is my voice clear?
Yes, Miss. You can continue. Don't worry.
Okay, for Dr. Amita Gupta, is there any best practice from India policy that can support for teacher professionalism? Because as we know that in Indonesia, what Dr. Yulida have present us before, we have like a teacher certification. The aim of the certification, of course, to maintain the teacher's professionalism. However, in the real, I mean, because I also as a teacher, we find difficulties that sometimes when we get, after we get the certifications, the motivation for the teacher to maintain their good quality of teaching need to be monitored more closely, because there are also many research that have a result that not every teacher who already had the certification can maintain their quality of teaching, such thing like that. So Dr. Amita Gupta, is there any best practice in India, especially about the policy for the teacher, how to maintain the professionalism? Is giving the incentives effective in India, or is there any other, what is it like, policy that really work for the teacher to keep maintain their professionalism? Thank you.
Thank you for your question, Uli Ratna. First, I want to just say that I really appreciated Yulida's talk, and I think she really highlights the affective qualities of what good teachers bring to the table, apart from the formal training. But coming back to the question, there is no one best practice in India. I think teachers have different requirements depending on what schools they're teaching in. As far as I know, the private schools in India require teachers to have certain degrees in early childhood, and whereas the government schools, it's a little more flexible. They do require degrees, but there's also some schools will not require the degree. It really depends on what school you're looking at. And I don't think there is a consistent, yet they're working on it, but there is no consistent policy for teacher training. The policy is one thing, but what is happening in practice is another thing. So there's a little discrepancy over there. More than India, in the US, we have the policy is a little more specific, and all schools, whether they are private schools or government schools, are required. And I will talk about New York State because that is where I teach. They require a lead teacher in a classroom to have a degree, a master's degree in early childhood education, plus state certifications and licensing. They have to pass state certification exams and licensing exams. And if they go through professional development courses every year, or a certain number of credits every year, if they do professional development courses, they go into higher brackets of pay and salary. So there is some system in place in the US, but in India, I don't think there is. There's no one practice, one policy, or one best practice. But I think given the talks that you just heard, and my talk and Yulida's talk, I think we both make the point that technical training is not enough to be a good teacher. I think there is something else that comes for being a good teacher, that passion, that dedication, that commitment, that love for children. Those things are not taught. They cannot be trained in those things technically. And I think in any policy going forward, wherever you create a policy for teacher education, I think that needs to be taken into account. That yes, you need certain technical skills, but you also need to draw on your own resources of affect, of qualities that you bring to the table that really make you a good teacher or not a good teacher. And those things should be rewarded. Those things should be rewarded, right? And when we come to evaluation of good teachers, and when we come to performance assessment of good teachers, those things should be counted in that. The teacher should be judged not only on their technical skills, but also in how happy is that classroom under her teaching, right? Where is that sense of joy for young children in the classroom? Does she bring that sense of joy to young children in the classroom? I think that's an important indicator of good teaching. So I'm going to turn it back to you, and maybe Yulida, you would like to say something about that as well.
Thank you,
very
Amita.
much.
I think I just add a little bit, Asila, if I may. I think in Indonesia, if you talk about teacher professionalism, it creates this sense of superiority of particular groups of teachers and inferiority of other teachers. And what missing from this picture is the social justice. Like in Indonesia, the problems with the qualification, the problems with certification, they are not equally distributed across the countries. Teachers in Timor, they had, in a particular district in Timor, they didn't have university. If professional or certificacy is used to govern a teacher, to discipline them, we should ask the government and other parties, like, what about the access of training, of legal recognitions and stuff like that? So, it's unfair for me if you are judged by professionalism, but you kind of miss or forget or neglect the most essential and the most important aspects that can support teachers. I think that's just my comment. Thank you.
Ms. Uli, I hope that's clear for answering your question. Okay, thank you very much for the question from Ms. Uli Ratna. I would like to invite another question from the participant. Is there anyone who wants to ask directly? Okay, I can see from the chat box here, so it's pretty long. Okay, from Suban Ian Palopo. Regarding to the professional teacher, as you said, how about Indonesian government's ambition to push out Satu Desa, Satu PAUD, one village, one ECCE program? As we know, in Indonesia has a few certified teachers, so that cannot fulfill those programs properly, and also about facilities, resources, and etc. How about your thoughts? That is going to decrease our education quality? I guess this delivered to both of our keynote speakers here. Professor Amita Gupta, would you like to answer first?
Yes, I can try to answer this. I do not know the context of Indonesia, but what I think the question, as I understand, is that there are not enough certified teachers. And so is that what the question is? That how do we supply certified, qualified teachers to all schools?
Yes, because it will influence the quality of Indonesian ECC.
Yeah. And that is a problem also. That is an issue in India as well. Not all teachers, you don't have enough teachers who have been qualified. And yet, I have to say that, there are NGOs that are run in very disadvantaged communities, socioeconomically disadvantaged communities, where the teacher is somebody who has probably finished high school and is placed from the community itself and placed in that community. And I think more than certification, she brings to the table a deep understanding and knowledge of who the children are. And I think that's a very important thing to keep in mind. So even if teachers are not certified, if they have qualities that are appropriate to be interacting with young children and teaching them, and if they reflect the communities that the children come from, I think that's really important. Because when we talk about culturally responsive pedagogy or culturally responsive teaching, that automatically qualifies them as a culturally responsive teacher, because they've understood the background and culture of the children that they are teaching, and they will teach them in a culturally responsive manner. So I think those are things we also have to keep in mind. So even if they're not technically certified, you don't have enough teachers to go around, if there are teachers who can be brought into the fold, who understand children, who have a deep knowledge of the community and are educated to be able to teach them, I think that is a qualification in itself also.
Thank you very much for the answer, Professor Gupta. And then next, move to Dr. Yulida. Would you like to add something?
Thank you, Asila. I think again, we also have to ask what is this certification means? Does it mean just paperwork? Because it's a way to appreciate teachers' competencies and experience and dedications, like what Amita mentioned before. I think we have to carefully look at what certificacy is about. And also, certificacy is a top-down approach. I think what I wish to see in the remote villages where there were not enough, or there were no teachers, is that to decentralize what do the community wants from the ECE, and it would help not only to reduce the burden of the government, but also to help the local resources, to help local human resources to get opportunity as ECE educators. And then also, oftentimes, we blame uncertified teacher or certified teacher for the quality of ECE. But we forgot that they also did not receive assistance. So there was no technical assistance present at the village level, at the district level, oftentimes they had to go to the ministry, which is like so far away from their place. And even when the ministry reply, it may not be relevant, not culturally sensitive to, or culturally contextual to their day-to-day life. So I think that's my answer.
Thank you very much, Dr. Yulida. I think you are in line with Professor Gupta. Thank you very much. We are going to move to another question. I think our director already opened her mic. I would like to invite Professor Tina.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry. Maybe I shouldn't be asking, but I can't help. I'm sorry. Yeah. Once again, thank you very much, Amita, and also Mbak Ida, for a very insightful keynote. So much to learn, so much to unpack. I've been, as you deliver your lecture, I've been, trying to be reflective with my own practices, particularly the fact that I'm now in CMO CCEP, which basically one of our responsibility is providing teachers training. Mbak Asila is laughing there. But but I think it has been to some extent, not to some extent, I fully agree with everything you said, Amita, and also Yulida. I think we really need to reconceptualize what we mean by teachers' professionalism. Definitely there is a need to go beyond deficit model of understanding teachers, because we always situate teachers as, having bad practice, being inadequate, and that's why training is needed in order to improve their competencies. And I also very much enjoy your presentation, Mbak Ida, when you mentioned about how teachers training can be part of a docile body mechanism, which I think I fully agree. But after being engaged in several teachers training, this is not a defense, this is rather a confession, I have to say. But after being involved in several teachers training, I have to say there are other perspectives that perhaps it's also important, and it might illuminate the way we conduct teachers training program with the teachers, particularly in the village, because whenever we went to several districts and then we conducted teachers training, I've always tried to be engaged in a conversation with the teachers, and most of them, they are very enthusiastic. They see the training as a space for them to meet another teachers, because being a teacher can be a very lonely job. So when they are sent by the local government to do this training, for them this is an opportunity to really meet the other teachers. Yeah, there are elements of colonial practices, because most of the speakers are coming from the central government, but I think at the same time this feeling of solidarity is developed during the training. This feeling of togetherness is also developed during the training, and very often during the training it is us who actually learn so much from them, because they actually, as you mentioned, Amita, they have so much to offer to the table. And I think that, my supervisor, my PhD supervisor always reminds me that we shouldn't throw the baby out of the hot water. So I think perhaps the same thing that we have to do when dealing with teachers training. But I think it's the matter of reconceptualizing teachers training and reconstructing it in a way that it is not colonial practices, that it provides space for the teachers to grow, and also not for the teachers, but for the training, and perhaps making sure that there exists equal power relation between the trainings and also the teachers. So again, I'm not becoming self-defensive here, but it's been a very interesting experience so far. When I'm joining CMO CCEP, I've seen a day-to-day practice when teachers are engaged in the training, and for me that's really another layer of understanding to the whole notion of teachers' professionalism. So thank you.
Can I just say one more thing in response to Veena's comment? Is I think we also have to keep in mind during the teacher training that the children are being assessed as well, right? I mean, the school systems, entire school systems and educational systems are based on children being assessed and evaluated every year. And so we can't forget the fact that we have to have teachers who will be able to help children succeed every year, right? So we do have, and I totally agree with you, the teacher training, yes, we need to have the qualitative elements in teachers that we just talked about. And yet at the same time, they do need to be technically skilled enough and know the content enough to be able to help children succeed in their academic work. So I think we have to keep all of that in mind. It's not one or the other. And I understand when you go into villages and you're doing teacher training, I mean, one of the first things that we, I have seen is that in India, it is rampant that families who are struggling socioeconomically, who are economically very disadvantaged, the one thing that they want is their children should learn the English language, because they view the English language as a power language and a way out of the poverty that they themselves have lived in. And they send their children to government schools, but they want their children to learn English. And so how do we reconcile all of those elements of teachers who will know English enough to teach the children English? They have the skills, the academic skills to be able to teach them, yet they also have the qualitative, affective qualities that will bring joy to the classroom. And I think as educators, we have to keep all of that in mind and bring all of that together and see how best to reconcile all of these requirements. Thank you.
Thank you, Amita. Fully agree with that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Amita and Madam Director, for your comment. For me, the terms of reconceptualizing teacher training, it sounds like direct instruction for my division in capacity building.
No, not instruction.
Okay, I would like to invite another question from the participant. Is there anyone? Okay, we have two participants who raising their hand. I would like to start from the Mr. Muhammad, Mr. Muhammad. Mr. Muhammad Tolcha, can you open your microphone? Is there anything? Is there technical problem? Oh, okay.
Yeah, because sorry, because it said that the host not allowing participant to unmute.
Oh, okay.
So, thank you. Hello everyone. My name is Muhammad Tolcha. I'm doing research on male teachers' perspective about professionalism. I'm using socio-cultural framework or theory. About professionalism. Thank you for Professor Dr. Amita and Dr. Yulida for the presentation. I learned a lot from both of you. But generally, I believe that there's no what so-called universal definition of professionalism. That's why so many scholars propose a new perspective, for example, democratic professionalism, managerial professionalism, or activist professionalism, and so on. All ideas which try to construct any new definition, I think is, as you know, it's limited to country-specific context. That's why I really like the quote that in Dr. Amita slides, but social, cultural, philosophical, and historical factors were not acknowledged in the teacher curriculum, especially in the context of India. That's my first comment, where the social cultural context is very important here. Secondly, when we talked about professionalism, mostly it's usually relates or connected to the characteristic of, say, ITL teachers, for example. But I think, as Jan Peters, for example, said that teachers in early childhood education is not only talked about technical, pedagogical knowledge. It's mostly about soft skill, and what Charmin Charlie said, it's about. She mentioned one of the example of competence, like a caring competence, which is it seems that it doesn't directly connect to educational background. Then previously in your presentation, Dr. Amita mentioned about personal self and professional self as teacher. Then this term recall the global discourse about professionalism. Some scholars said that professionalism should not conceptualize simply as staff competence, for example, but in larger or broader context, like for example, in Europe, there's a concept called system competence. So it doesn't only talk about the personal characteristics, but professionalism linked to multi-layer, multifaceted dimensions. In addition to personal teacher personal themselves, but also parents, institutions, government, profession, and such things. Of course, we should not accept this concept as taken for granted too, since we need to modify it according to the context where we conduct study. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Muhammad Tolhaj, for your appreciation for the two keynote speakers. And I would like to move to the second participant who already raised hand. Together with Mr. Muhammad Tolhaj. Did I miss? I can see Miss Gita Febria.
Okay.
Okay.
Do you hear me clear?
Yes.
It's clear? Okay. Hello, everyone. I'm Gita Febria Fiskawati. I'm not from ISI, but I'm from physical education. But I'm very interested with ISI. Thank you for Prof. Amita and Madam Yulida and also Professor Vina. I learned a lot from you all about ISI. I want to raise a problem related to student and the professional impact. We all know that EC is the foundation for holistic children development. However, we don't know how the benchmark of professional EC teacher are able to stimulate children holistically. So, how to instill awareness of the professional of early childhood education teacher? That's enough for me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Gita. Is the question for both of the speakers, I guess. Okay. Madam Yulida, would you like to answer first?
I'm sorry, what's the verb again? To instill the professional? Can you repeat the...
Ms. Gita, can you repeat the question?
How to instill?
Okay. How to instill awareness of the professionalism of early childhood education teacher.
Awareness. Okay.
Yes, awareness.
Of professionalism. Okay. How to instill the awareness of professionalisms. I think, I mean, just to show you, I mean, there are various, I think we have to understand the context of the teachers and the environment that she or he teach. In many cases, teachers are aware of the demand of profession. In Indonesian case, most of the teachers associate professionalisms with the obligations, like how many hours they should teach. So those are the structure that have been outlined, what makes them a teacher. But I think it's very interesting questions, actually, because it reminds me about accountability. Like, if you're a professional, who are you accountable to? Are you accountable to the students, the parents, the community, the government, or to yourself, or to other parties? So
I think if you, I mean, based on my research, for example, the notion of professional did not came that strong in the interactions with the teachers, among the teachers, among teachers and parents, between teachers and the students. It's spoken in through different language, different way. How, like, maybe what Amita said before, what makes a good teacher? So if you're attentive to your students' needs, are you professional? If you can deliver a certain demand or a certain topic to your student, is that what makes you professional? Or is what the government asks you to fill up all this form, to go to a certain training scheme, that's what makes you professional? Being professional, in my opinion, come from various channel. And how to instill the awareness? Well, it depends. If you come from a community where the parents are very attentive, parents are very concerned about their children, then you would know that. You would know the demand of the parents without what the parents want. You would feel, not you would not, but you would feel the pressure that the parents want a certain way. The parents don't like when you pinch their children. It comes like that. But if what you mean is professional, as in you have a certain degree, and as you have a particular a training or program, in my case, what I found, I don't know, maybe Mafina can share her story, but in my case, teachers are very aware of those things, because that's what make their presence recognized by the system, right? But again, I said, the problem is not all teachers have the access to those things. Yeah, so I'm not sure if I can answer that questions. How to raise awareness about the professional, because teachers understand those things, most of them. Okay.
Can I let me jump in?
Help me.
Let me jump in. I think what Yulita said was absolutely right. They may not be understanding the term professionalism, but they definitely understand the term of how to be a better teacher, and that is professionalism. Because the way I'm defining professionalism is an improvement of your own quality and standard of teaching, right? And that all teachers are very much aware of, and they are told, they are evaluated. You've done a good job, you haven't done a good job. So that aspiration to improve one's practice is definitely there. They may not see it as in the term of professionalism, but it's definitely in terms of how can I be a good teacher, or who is a good teacher, who is a better teacher, am I as good a teacher as somebody else? So that idea of professionalism, if you don't use that word, they're already aware of it. And if you want to instill the idea of teacher professionalism in that term, then you just have to start using that term more and more when you start talking about the quality of teaching, right? And I think what Yulita just said, I think they're already very much aware of good teaching or not good teaching. And how do you improve your teaching? That's professionalism.
Thank you very much for both answers from Madam Yulida and Professor Amita Gupta. I hope it answered the question from Ms. Gita. Thank you very much. I guess there is one more question from the chat box here, and it is very interesting one. Thank you so much for your presentation. Yeah. Oh, sorry. This question is from Budiarti Rahayu. Thank you so much for your presentation, Prof. Gupta and Ibu Yulida. They are very enlightening, particularly regarding Ibu Rita's experience. I wonder if you can share the ways how we can really identify and respond to ECE teachers' needs for capacity building. What are the ways to ensure the teacher professional development can be contextually based and culturally responsive. I think Professor Amita Gupta already turned on the microphone. You may answer first.
Sure. So how can we identify and respond to ECE teachers' needs for capacity building? Well, that there really is a need for capacity building, especially in densely populated countries like India, Indonesia. There, we don't have enough teachers, and how do we increase the number of teachers that we have? How do we do this capacity building? The issue is, this is what I found in my research, is that issue is not if we have requirements, if the state has requirements that for teachers to be qualified for teaching, right? Whether it's a degree or whether it's a certification or whether it's an exam, first of all, what are those requirements? And second of all, do we have educators who will train the teachers for those requirements? Because that is another issue we have. It's not only capacity building of teachers, it's how can we work on capacity building for teacher educators who there's a dearth of also, right? So we have to think about that as well. I think we have to start when there is such a dearth of teachers and we need many more teachers than we have. Then we have to start with basic training, very basic. Our requirement should be very basic, and then add on to it, because we can't have very high level requirements and not enough teachers, because there's not going to be enough teachers in enough time to teach all those, to fill all those posts. So you have to start at the very basic level. And I'm going to jump to your second one about how can we ensure teacher professional development be contextually based and culturally responsive? Two very important things. One is to understand where the teacher is being prepared for, to understand that context, because all teachers prepared in the same way are not going to be culturally responsive everywhere, right? So I think teachers prepared for a particular geographic location should be able to understand the communities who are living there, the background of the communities, the challenges those communities have, the familiar experiences the children who come from those communities have. And contextually responsive, culturally responsive teaching is nothing but building on what is familiar to the to the children. It's very simple. It's not a very complicated term. It's not a very complicated concept. Culturally responsive teaching merely means teaching in a way that the children you're teaching understand what you're saying, and building on what they are already familiar with, what their context is. And that's what culturally responsive teaching is. And so that's why I said a teacher teaching in one location may learn how to be culturally responsive for that particular community of children, but she may have to do something different if she goes to teach in another location, because that context will change, right? So I hope that kind of answers that question.
Thank you very much, Professor Gupta, for your clear and concise answer. And then move to Dr. Yulida, please.
Thank you, Asila. I have several experience, which is a bit interesting. Like, the first was when I was doing my research. I realized that the teacher. This is a story, right? So I'm not going to answer it like a theoretical base. So this is a story. So I went to this center. The school was finished, and I went to see the teacher. And then I realized that they were drawing these ducks over and over again. They did the duck, like that type of paper that is very thin, almost transparent. They use that kind of paper. They draw the ducks one by one. And I asked, what are you doing? And they said, oh, we will teach the children to color tomorrow. So even just to ask the teachers to teach the children to do some coloring, because there's no photocopier, there's no printer, the teacher had to do one by one manually 20 times, because they had 20 students. I mean, like it shows that, for me, it shows that we in this big city, we often forgot what they need, right? Like maybe they need access to photocopy or to printers. And sometimes we gave them all these fancy terms, you know, like, oh, this is the child-centered method and things like that, while they struggle with a very basic thing. And the second time, I asked one of the teachers, so she just come back from a training, and I asked her, oh, what did you learn from the training? And she said, oh, there's this university scholar from Jakarta coming to teach us. And he told us about the policy of curriculum. He basically outlined the government regulations, like what's the requirement and stuff like that. And I asked her, do you think that's useful? And she said, no, we don't want to know the government policy. It's so far away from us. She just wants to know how to teach children. So that's I mean, like, maybe even for the simplest thing, they don't exist in many places, because the way we thought what training should be like, it was just far away from the teacher's needs. And I think I completely agree with what Amita said, that teach them with a very basic thing, just how to engage the children, how to make how to pack a learning that involves something. There's so many examples that makes learning so decontextualized, because us, the government, and we who's from university, think that those things are important, but actually not for the teachers. They need the basic things: how to engage students, how to make sure children are secure, are feeling safe and ready to interact with others. Those things sometimes we forget. And from that moment on, and I think this is still my wish, actually, that I realized that, I mean, training is important. Training is very important. I don't blame any certificacy or training programs. They are very important. But I wish the trainers know the situations, live and have experience with different contexts. So if they teach, for example, if they teach this child-centered approach in a very complicated way, teachers don't understand. I mean, somehow maybe we scholars need to reflect, like, okay, we have all these fancy concepts, but if we go to the ECE centers in a village and reflect whether those concepts, how to apply those concepts, how to explain those concepts better in a language that teachers can understand. Because if the teachers can understand, like what Amita said, then they may also not be able to make to communicate to the students, and that affects the output as well. So I think that's, I mean, it's not, I believe it's not a rocket science. It just needs a more than business as usual. I think that's my answer. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Yulida, for your powerful answer. I guess this is our end of Q&A session. Thank you very much for the fruitful and insightful discussion we have here, and all the active participation from all the participants. We, the committee, really appreciate it. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. The committee asked me to do the wrap up, but I don't agree with the committee, since I do believe that all the participants here already have some reflection in their own mind, that we can keep our spirit to learn more out of this webinar. Thank you very much for your participation here. I would like to give back to the Ms. Tiara.
Okay, thank you for many information that we have learned. Thank you very much for Ms. Asila as our moderator today. And we will move into next agenda that we will invite our Deputy Director for Program, Mr. Itfuti, to give a certificate for our honorable keynote speakers. Okay.
Okay, thank you very much, Ms. Tiara. Now we would like to grant the certificate to Prof. Dr. Amita Gupta. This is by online first. We will send you, I don't know when.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
This is your certificate, look like in the picture, you can see. I hope to see you somewhere can provide this certificate.
Thank you so much. I am so honored to have participated in this webinar, and I thank you for inviting me.
Okay, thank you for
Hope
your
to invite you
contribution
in
for today.
person.
Okay, the next certificate give to Ibu Julida Pangastuti, PhD. Is your certificate, Ibu Julida?
Thank you so much. And thank you for pronouncing my name correctly. That's awesome.
This is Cambodian guy.
Thank you so much. Such an
Thank you,
honor.
thank you. I give back to Tiara, please.
Okay, thank you very much for our keynote speakers and for Mr. Edfuti. And I would like to invite again for Mr. Edfuti because our Deputy Director Program will be deliver his closing remarks for our meetings today. So Mr. Edfuti, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you to Tiara, Honorable Director of Simeo Cecep, Honorable Speakers, Professor Dr. Amita Gupta, and Madam Julia Pangastuti, PhD from UGM. This is my school graduation also. I'm graduate from UGM. Distinguished guests and participants in this international webinar, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good afternoon to all of you. I'm very grateful for this international webinars on the title Teacher Professionalism with the Global Dialogue between North and South. This webinar is one among many Simeo Cecep effort in raising awareness on teacher competency and professionalism. This webinar tried to escalate this issue and wider perspective of teacher global issue. From this webinar, I shall also learn from Professor Dr. Amita Gupta about the sense of joy. Because we see in the early childhood education is a play-based learning. So the sense of joy is the one thing that can be supplied to the play-based learning. And then also about the basic training for our teacher. It's a good input for us as the regional center to be input to be provided training to the other teacher in Indonesia and for the Southeast Asian ECCE teachers. The teacher role in ECCE is one of the significant factors that determines the quality of ECCE in the interaction of young children and their teacher has been proven to be great stimuli for development. Therefore, teacher professionalism is a prominent issue in Southeast Asia countries. Simeo Cecep, as one of the Simeo regional center, dealing with the field of ECCE and parenting, it is important to us to do research, training, and advocacy that incorporate with the diverse of Southeast Asian context in the better understanding and improvement of the quality of ECCE in services across the regions. We hope this webinar will bring us one step closer to the quality teachers and learning in ECCE in Southeast Asia and beyond. Thank you for your support and endorsement, and during the webinar, all very active to make this webinar more fruitful for us. I hope we can see you in near future at the next event of CMO-CCEP. By saying Hamdallah, praise to the God Almighty and this international webinar on teacher professionalisms, global South and North dialogue is officially closed. Thank you very much, and may God bless you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Itfuti, for your closing remarks. And ladies and gentlemen, there are some information that we would like to share about how to get certificate and how to download the material. Maybe our team can present how to get the certificate and download the material. Okay. About how to get the certificate, participant will be asked to fill out the evaluation form in the link siameoccecep.org, webinar on menu, survey and evaluation, or http link siameoccecep.org eval /TC. The deadline for filling out the evaluation form will due at Monday, 31st October 2022 at 19 p.m. Jakarta time. And the certificate will be accessible on http link siameoccecep.org /TC starting Monday on 7 November 2022. And how about to download the material, please? Participants can download the material form in the link http link.siameoccecep.org material TC by resource person consent. Maybe that's all that the event that we had for today's meeting. And dear all participants and guests, thank you for all participation in this meeting. And stay tuned to our social media and website to any updates about our project or program or next webinar. And see you in the next webinar. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Amita. Thank you, Mbak Ida. Pleasure to have you. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you. Thank you, Vina and Yulida and Asila and everybody. So nice to meet you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.
Take care, Amita.
Vina.
Okay, bye. Bye.
Bye. Izin leave.